Okay, it's 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Good evening and welcome to our town hall related to our secondary educational programs. My name is Jen Blake. I'm the Director of Communications for Great Valley, and I am happy to be facilitating tonight's conversation. The purpose of this meeting is to address some of the questions we've been asked related to our hybrid and virtual education programs for students in grades 6 through 12. Our program this evening is scheduled for 90 minutes. We'll spend the first part of tonight reviewing some information, and we'll follow that with a question and answer period that I will facilitate based on the questions that were submitted in advance. Participants are also encouraged and welcome to submit additional questions to our panelists this evening through the Q&A feature of our webinar, and we will spend the last portion of our evening addressing those questions. This town hall is being recorded and will be available on our website so that those who could not participate have access to the information. I am pleased to welcome our panel members who are joining us to provide information and address questions. Dr. Daniel Goffredo is our Superintendent of Schools and will present an overview of information as we get started. Joining him on the panel from District Office are Assistant Superintendents Dr. Stephen O'Toole and Dr. Joanna Wexler, our Director of Teaching and Learning, Dr. Tricia Beck, and also from District Office is Andrea Dinsmore, our Director of Student Services. We are also pleased this evening to have two of our secondary principals with us tonight, Dr. Edward Souders from Great Valley Middle School and Dr. Heidi Capetola from Great Valley High School. Thank you to those parents who are joining us this evening. We hope that this conversation is one that you find helpful and informative as we move forward in our reopening plan. And now I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Goffredo, who I know would like to welcome you and provide some additional information.
Thank you, Ms. Blake. I really appreciate the introduction and your facilitation tonight. And also thank you to all of our families and parents who are on the call this evening. This has been quite a journey for all of us, for you as families and parents and for your children, and certainly for us trying to navigate a pandemic and deliver the best high quality program that we can. What I'd like to do is just open with a brief few minutes of an overview about how we arrived to today. And then really the crux of the evening is devoted to answering your questions and giving you the information you need so that you have a high level of comfort with your child's programming, albeit the virtual program, 100% virtual program, or our hybrid model, which we've begun just this week. So to first frame the conversation, it's really important, and I've said this from the onset, we are dealing with a medical issue. The pandemic transcends education. We're used to dealing with research and best practice and educational models, but having to navigate a medical issue is really something that none of us have had to engage in our community or in our careers for that matter. So the idea of trying to operate while also honoring medical guidance has really added a layer that we haven't had to contend with in the past. And well into July, it was still to be determined whether or not social distancing in schools would be 6 feet or 3 feet. We had organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Chester County Health Department. Early on in June and July, we're talking about the efficacy of 3 feet in a classroom and whether that was acceptable. Other groups like the CDC and other organizations were providing 6 feet. So here, to give some context, as educators, we were trying to develop models through June and July, not really even being aware of what social distancing would look like or what type of square footage we would be afforded in our schools and in our buildings. So that was a challenge. Through time, Great Valley, like many districts, settled on 6 feet, and we started to build, at that point, continue to build our educational program. Our goal from the onset, when we determined 6 feet, we felt working with the local health department, looking at COVID-19 cases and transmission rates within the county, that we could open in a hybrid model. So in July through the early part of August, the administrative team was working on building a hybrid model that would bring half of our students in on one day and the alternate on the subsequent day. In the middle of August is when we were surprised, is probably the appropriate word, by the Chester County Health Department's recommendation that schools go into a virtual model until October 9th. And that really came from anticipation and speculation that there was going to be a Labor Day spike, much like what we had witnessed in July 4th. And we did see a Labor Day spike. Cases did rise over the Labor Day period, but luckily they came back down to acceptable levels, which really have brought us to where we are today. So as much as we continue week in, week out to monitor the metrics, to monitor COVID transmission rates and positivity rates within our county, we are well within the limits recommended by the Chester County Health Department and other medical organizations, such as the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, to operate our hybrid model. And we'll continue to monitor and see whether or not a full 5-day return is possible. And I know we'll address some questions on that, or whether we're going to be in a holding pattern of hybrid learning, or as some speculate, there's a realistic possibility we could fall back into our 100% virtual model. Our goal here at Great Valley is to really be responsive to the conditions and to be able to pivot as the pandemic changes and either increases or decreases. So pulling all of this together has brought us to where we thought the best model we could provide our secondary students was an interactive streaming model through our high school and our middle school staff. And really what that enabled us to do is to offer all the full, robust programs that Great Valley has to offer without limiting. So it is a new approach. We're going to spend a good bit of time answering your questions on the model. As a precursor, though, I want to be fully transparent that this is a brand new model. We have done some testing and some experimenting throughout the summer. We've collaborated with other districts who are doing similar approaches. But the truth of the matter is, none of us really know what it's going to look like in large middle schools or high schools. We're doing our best to prepare. Your feedback, even tonight, is going to help us to refine and develop further. But we do ask for your patience and understanding as we do something that's never really been done before. So we are all in this together. That'll be a constant theme you'll hear from me throughout the evening, in ways that we can work together to best serve your children here in our school system. So Mrs. Blake, thank you so much for the time to have an opening statement, and I'll turn it back to you so we can begin answering some of our family's questions.
Thank you, Dr. Goffredo. Many of the parents who joined us submitted questions in advance of tonight. And as I mentioned, the first part of our presentation will be spent answering those questions and topics of interest. The first set of questions are related to health and safety of our school communities and really address the protocols and procedures in our schools. These questions deal with topics like masking, metrics for reopening, quarantine protocols, and absences. So Dr. Goffredo, you spoke about the metrics we've been monitoring to determine our action plans. Could you speak specifically about what those metrics are and how we would know if it's appropriate to fully reopen schools?
Yes, it's a great question. And there are largely two primary metrics that we're monitoring each and every week within Chester County. One is our incident rate, and the incident rate is based on the number of cases in Chester County per 100,000 people. And the Chester County Health Department has established ranges, and this information is in the public purview. It's available if you go to the Chester County Health Department website, look for their school resources and school guidance documents, and you'll find this. It's very early. It's on the second or third page of their school guidance document. And the health department has established what they determine to be reasonable metrics for reopening. Incidence rate, largely, they will recommend that if a Chester County's incident rate is between 0 cases and 80 cases per 100,000 people, that it is acceptable for school districts to entertain a hybrid model. More recently, in the last few weeks, we've seen our incident rate here in Chester County really be in the roughly 40 to 50 cases. We have dipped at moments into the 20 cases per 100,000, which is very promising. We've seen to have stabilized, however, more in that 40 to 50 range over the last few weeks. So that's the first metric that we watch. And we have been reassured by both the Chester County Health Department and some of the medical experts at CHOP that the conditions are safe for us to reopen in a hybrid model. The second metric is our positivity rate, and that's the number of PCR tests that come back with a positive result. The positivity rate in Chester County has been very promising. We are, for the last few weeks, hovering around the 3% positivity rate, and anything under, I believe, 7% really enables us to stay within the range of entertaining a hybrid. And our positivity rate has been fairly stable. So together, those two indicators are really what we watch each and every week to determine whether we need to progress with our hybrid model, start to consider virtual learning, or if levels get low enough, and I know we all want this, if they get low enough and suppressed enough, and our incidence rate is extremely low, close to 10 or even under 10, and our positivity rate gets to 1% or even less, the health department will work with us and we would be able to entertain a full reopening of 5 days a week. But that's still, to be perfectly honest with folks, I think that's still some ways off, but that is embedded in the guidance. And I think the optimist in all of us hopes that we are able to get there someday, because I think we all want to bring our children back full time and get back to the full robust program that we're used to delivering and that your children deserve.
So just as a follow-up, to be clear, is the opening of schools dependent on a vaccine being available? And is it appropriate to say that at this point, we do not have an estimated date for the expected return to school for full days, 5 days a week?
As much as we all hope for a vaccine and a highly effective vaccine, we are not basing our decision-making on the arrival or development of a vaccine. That could be far off. We're still not sure of the efficacies of some vaccines. Really, those metrics that I just referenced earlier, the positivity rate and the incident rate, really are key. Within that, however, if those transmission levels get low and the positivity rate gets low enough, the Chester County Health Department is willing to let school districts entertain social distancing measures less than 6 feet. That is done on a case-by-case basis. And if we see community transmission really get to a low level, each school district in Chester County is able to then engage in the health department and have discussions on whether or not 6 feet is acceptable or something that can be considered. Again, I think that's pretty far off from all the forecasting that we're seeing, but it's important for people to know that that's going to be the key metric as far as when we reinstitute, our full program pre-pandemic.
Thank you for that. One of the popular topics related to the pandemic is related to masking, and we certainly received a number of questions around that topic. As we've shared, students and staff will be expected to wear masks on the bus and in school. The universal face covering order, however, issued by the Pennsylvania Department of Health, does define exemptions for mask wearing. Dr. Dinsmore, can you talk with us about those exemptions and how it's determined whether or not a student is exempt from wearing a mask in our schools?
Sure, thank you. So currently, as a district, we're marrying two pieces of regulatory guidance. So the first of which is Dr. Levine's Universal Face Coverings Order. The second is information that we've received from the Department of Education. So in the Universal Face Coverings Order, there are 5 specific exemptions that are listed, 3 of which are exemptions that we feel are most likely within our school system. So those include any students who have pre-existing medical conditions or disabilities, any students who rely primarily on being able to communicate and see the mouth if they're deaf or hearing impaired, as well as any students who are unable to remove a mask independently. So with that information, we had 2 survey windows in which our parents were able to respond. So we took that information and coordinated with our building nurses. The building nurses were able to reach out to families for a more personal conversation, just so that we could figure out the proper pathway for the concern that's been exhibited. So at this point, if a family continues to wish to pursue that mask exemption, there is a physician's form for documentation that is required. Within that form, essentially a physician is listing brief information about any kind of medical condition that may exist, or any of the 3 exemptions that I had previously listed, as well as a list of accommodations that we see most frequently within the school system. So that might include a student who's able to wear a mask with a recommendation from a doctor about the frequency and duration of breaks throughout the day. Some of our students are able to tolerate wearing a mask if there are strategic breaks built into their day. The second accommodation is a face shield. The third of which is for a student who may have difficulty with sensory issues and being able to tolerate a mask. So we may build into a student's program a strategic plan to increase tolerance for mask wearing.
Thank you. Popular in the media and online is the conversation about what is an acceptable face covering. Dr. Goffredo, could you address that for our parents as it relates to our schools?
Yes, and I've received countless emails on that very topic, as I know our principals have as well. So as Ms. Dinsmore recommended or suggested, we are really following the universal face coverings orders set forth by the Pennsylvania Department of Health. Within that order, masks and shields are deemed acceptable. Now, operationally here in school, we want students to wear a mask. We want to do everything possible to place a mask on our students. We realize, though, there are unique circumstances with certain children where that may or may not be acceptable. But the mask is by far strongly recommended. In those cases where a child is unable or it's medically, they meet one of the exemptions described by Mrs. Dinsmore, then we would look at a shield, and then we would look at other options, within that exemption category. One thing that we really want to clarify is there's been a lot of recent studies on the efficacy of gaiters, and these are the cloth neck sleeves that people can pull up and down over their nose and mouth. We have seen countless reports and research that they lack some of the efficacy. And so even though they probably meet the definition of the universal face covering order, we are strongly discouraging the use of gaiters. Here's where I'm going to come back to my opening comments. This idea of us all being in this together, wearing a mask to protect one another, and really the more we can do to maintain masking and social distancing, the better our chances of having a sustained opening are. So this is the reason we're making the distinction. We truly want to get as many children in masks as possible. The goal would be to have every child wearing a mask. We'll incorporate mask breaks as needed, and there'll be other opportunities. But that's really important. And that's an area where I think we all have to work together as a school and as a community to do our part to ensure we have a sustained opening. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit with the masking and the gaiters and shields as well.
The next set of questions relate to protocols for suspected or for confirmed cases of COVID. Dr. Goffredo, could you talk with us about the protocols for when a student or staff member in our school feels ill? And are there a specific set of guidelines that we will follow to adhere to those situations?
We truly are blessed to have our own county-based health department. Now, the Chester County Health Department services the schools in Chester County, so there's the 12 public school systems, as well as guidance to our colleagues in Delaware County and the public schools therein. So working with them has really been advantageous to the district. I can tell you personally, myself, with many of the other superintendents in Delaware and Chester County, we've been meeting at least once a week with the director of the Chester County Health Department for the last few months. She engages in dialogue with us, gets our feedback, and really has been responsive to the needs within a lot of the school districts. Along those lines, they have issued very simple to follow protocols. These protocols are available on the Chester County Health Department website. As I referenced earlier, they are in the school guidance section, and they're there for public consumption. And there are very simple flowcharts that we follow that it really a series of yes or no questions. Is the person symptomatic? Were they near? And they address a variety of situations. So we have some really good resource documents provided to us. And also the health department has assigned the Great Valley School District its own representative. And so many of the members that you see on this call this evening, we all have access to that representative to double check on, are we handling this right? Here's the situation. What is the recommendation of the health department? They've just been wonderful partners. They've been highly responsive. They answer our calls. They get back to us right away. And I want to assure everybody on this call, every family member, every parent listening, we're educators. And as I stated earlier, we're navigating a medical situation. We are not going to go it alone. We are going to call the health department with every probable case, suspected case, and confirmed case of COVID-19. And please know that that partnership is very well embraced by both us and the health department.
And so, Dr. Goffredo, will our school community be notified of confirmed cases in our schools?
Yes, and the method of that notification may look a little differently. Families may have noticed last week, there was a letter that we sent out with a confirmed case. At that point, that student had not been in school. We wanted to be fully transparent and share a letter. However, if you've been following the situation closely and you know the metrics, we've had medical experts such as Dr. David Rubin out of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, their policy lab, indicate that we are going to have cases of COVID-19 in our schools. Our goal is to make sure there is no transmission of those cases. And so we know that there are going to be cases. We know we need to communicate that to our families so that they are aware. One thing that we are currently working on, and we're very close to finalizing, is creating a COVID-19 dashboard that will reside on our website. And that dashboard will indicate each one of our 6 schools, as well as our district office and other non-school locations that we have. And it'll report out by staff member and adult the number of confirmed cases and the number of student cases. We realized that we could get in a routine of sending letters home district-wide on a weekly basis. And after a certain point in time, we realized that's probably going to lose its effectiveness. So as a communication tool, you would expect to go to our website and you will get the most current information on COVID-19 cases in each of our school by staff member and by child.
Thank you, Dr. Goffredo. Dr. Wexler, if we could shift the conversation to you, some of the questions that we've been asked relate to staff and expectations if staff, for example, travel to an area on the quarantine list. Are we requiring teachers to quarantine if they visit a location on Pennsylvania's list? And if so, what plans, if any, are in place that would allow instruction to continue for students of that teacher?
Sure. So in August, when we were planning to reopen and we asked staff to return to the buildings back in August, we did begin to communicate, or we did communicate that expectation that quarantining was strongly recommended, and it was our expectation as a district that that would occur. So all staff, not just our teaching staff, but all staff in the district are aware of that expectation. And if a teacher or staff member is traveling to one of the states on the list, they are to notify us through the application of the emergency leave, which is under the Coronavirus CARES Act. If they are able to telework for 2 weeks, it depends on the role that they have in the district and their responsibilities. We do allow for that. So in the case of a secondary teacher who is streaming instruction, what we are offering to teachers, provided we can continue to staff that arrangement, is that the teacher would be able to stream from home because they are not necessarily sick or unwell, they're just quarantining, that they would be able to do that. And then we would have another adult in the classroom to supervise and facilitate the students in the classroom. So essentially the teacher is still instructing from a remote location. And although we know that's not ideal, we would all prefer the teacher to be in the classroom with students. We feel that that is the best way to ensure continuity of instruction for students. And we would use that model also if a teacher had to quarantine due to potential exposure. Again, they're not sick or unwell, but could be afforded the opportunity to continue to teach students with another adult present on a short-term basis to facilitate supervision.
Also related to staffing, Dr. Wexler, how are we working with teachers who need to take a leave or cannot, for health reasons, come to school physically or teach online? Are we working with teachers to find solutions for those cases?
Sure. So under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, any employee is able to request what they call an interactive process, which is under the ADA. They would request to meet with me, and we would go through their health conditions and what reasonable accommodations can be afforded to them. In consultation with our legal, with our attorneys, we've been guided that if a teacher is in need of a virtual teaching position, that wouldn't require them to be live with students, that we are able to offer that if it is available. So if it's not available, then we need to discuss with the employee other reasonable accommodations to ensure enhanced safety. That could look like additional plexiglass options in their room, perhaps changes in duties or assignments that would limit exposure, entering the building at a separate time or location where there's less traffic, that kind of thing. So we work through that. And again, it's a process where we dialogue. And so if none of that is available or is not an option for that individual, They may also look at their leave options. Those could look like be applying for family medical leave, which is FMLA, which could go up to 12 weeks. There's also sabbatical entitlements that could potentially be an option. Or lastly, an uncompensated leave of absence, where the teacher would be on a leave of absence for the year, and we would be looking for a long-term substitute. So that's kind of the continuum of options that are available to our teachers.
Thank you. There's been conversation on social media, and some questions were submitted tonight related to how information is being communicated to families who are affected by a teacher who can't be in the classroom or who can't fulfill their teaching assignment for some reason. I'm wondering if one of our principals could talk a little bit about how teachers are communicating their need to not be present. Are they communicating directly with students, or is information being sent home to the family by the building or the teacher? Dr. Capetola, could you speak to that at the high school?
Sure. We do have some situations in the high school where, as Dr. Wexler shared, we do have some teachers that are streaming, so the instruction is continuing for those students with that teacher. However, when there does become a need for a long-term substitute and that teacher will be taking a leave or will no longer be with the students, they're communicating, the teachers are communicating with the students first. They're also sending a message to parents either via email or through Skyward. And if you have any questions about that, you can contact any one of the principals.
Thank you, Dr. Capetola. We're going to transition now into questions we received related specifically to our educational program. We received a handful of questions related to our hybrid schedule. Dr. O'Toole, could you talk with us a little about our current secondary schedule and the rationale for how it is structured?
Sure. Thank you, Mrs. Blake, and good evening, everyone. As Dr. Goffredo mentioned in the beginning, all of the decisions that we were confronted were based on the medical recommendations that we were receiving, particularly with regards to physical distancing of students. And so we knew that we had to first examine how many students we could have in our schools. And as many of you know, our schools were designed based on recommendations at the time for maximum capacity of students. And if some of you have even listened to some of the board meetings, we've been talking about a feasibility study all of last year about the maximum capacity of the number of students within our schools. And they were designed to meet not only recommendations from the state, but also the guidelines from the school district. And so they were not designed necessarily for figuring out how many students could fit in a classroom based on 6-foot distance guidelines. So our principals at all levels really worked over the summer to not only, when initially it was 3 feet and then changed to 6 feet, to determine how many students we could have attend our schools and to begin that process. And we knew about 50% of our students could safely attend school. So taking that into consideration, we looked at then identifying the students that could come into school on a particular day, what 50% capacity would mean. And so that's why we identified looking at all the last names of our students across the district and recognized that the middle point of our alphabet is actually around K. So A to K would be about 50% of our families, and then L to Z would be the other 50%. So we did that, and then we started to look at what programming we wanted to offer within a hybrid model, how we wanted to structure that and offer the opportunities for students to come in. And as Dr. Goffredo mentioned, we were working on that leading up to the latter part of August, when we were told that the recommendation to start virtual. And we anticipated that. We anticipated all along that we may have to go to a virtual model at some point in time. And what we were examining was not only hybrid models from our local area, but across the country, and how school districts were attempting to implement this model. And what we felt strongly about was offering the programs that our students have available to them and not limiting those opportunities. And many of the all virtual options that we were seeing that were being proposed, as well as being offered to families, would limit options for students. And for those of you that may not know, many of the secondary level, the middle school, 7th grade to 12th grade, require a certified individual to teach that content area. And that places a constraint in the sense that we just can't offer all the courses that we would want to unless we have a certified teacher to teach that. So we felt strongly that we wanted to provide students with all of the opportunities that we have at our middle school and high school, not limit courses that would be offered to students. And we also knew that the older students may be able to adjust to not only a virtual opportunity from seeing the teacher, knowing that in the spring we had teachers working with students virtually, that we could, in essence, have the students be presented with the teacher virtually while at home, as well as then when we had students hybrid in the classroom, that we could blend those two means of delivery of instruction. So we started with that mindset that we needed to be flexible. We needed to be nimble to the possibility that we would need to move to virtual if cases were to rise to a certain level that would require that, would precipitate going to virtual. We didn't anticipate it being as soon as it was, but we did plan for it. So that's why we then had students basically scheduled for all their courses, looking at the number of students that we could have in a hybrid model who could come in, and they follow the same schedule that they would normally follow if they were actually in the school, and we made a conscious decision to do that. Then we had to actually look at the days of the week. Now, many of you may know we have a 6-day schedule at our middle school and high school, actually K-12, and a 6-day schedule fitting in a 5-day week is a little bit challenging. When students would arrive, some districts were looking at coming up with students arriving to school on different days, on the day cycles, and we just felt as though, knowing across the district that we needed to adjust and accommodate families. Some older students are sometimes the caregivers of younger students. And families need consistency. We know that if you know that your children are going to school on a certain day, and all of the children in your family are going to school on a certain day, that we're consistent. So we had to look at, in essence, not looking at those day schedules of 1 through 6, but looking at an A-B schedule. And that's what we did. We separated out those alphabet, the last names, by an A day and the first half of the alphabet, and B day on the second half. We also know that through our work this past spring with our teachers, this is a brand new model, as Dr. Goffredo mentioned. We haven't done this before. Our teachers aren't accustomed to, although they teach virtually in the spring, that was the first time, and there's still professional development that they need, as well as examinations of their courses and things to that effect. We did a lot of work this summer for that, but that work needs to continue over the year. So we needed time for our teachers to get together to talk about what they're doing within their courses, and that we learned from the spring with the asynchronous Wednesdays that we had to look at opportunities for our teachers to really get together, meet with each other, and then also for us to provide professional development for them on an ongoing basis. When we looked at last year in the spring, we had Wednesdays. We then looked at the calendar and recognized that if we took away too many asynchronous, we didn't want to take too many asynchronous Wednesdays, because that across the year would be about 39 Wednesdays, whereas 32 Mondays exist in the year. So we could capitalize on, there are some holidays, and minimize the number of asynchronous days throughout the year. And so that's why we selected a Monday. So all of this was examined for consistency across families K-12, as well as to make sure that we had half the students arriving to the middle school and high school, with, again, the mindset of knowing that we may have to switch back from virtual to hybrid and have students in those sections of classes. So that gives a little bit of the background around how we design the schedule, and really we're accommodating and making sure that we were able to offer all of our current programming that we have.
Thank you. One of the things that we've communicated to families is that the option of changing their students' educational program. So in other words, a student could go from virtual to hybrid or hybrid to virtual throughout the year. Could you, Dr. O'Toole, just clarify that process for making those changes and the timelines and rationale for those timelines when changes would become effective?
Sure, that's a great question, and it comes back basically to what I was referencing. We were anticipating the need for students and families to make decisions to either have hybrid as the option or virtual, and it still presents a challenge. And the challenge is the capacity to ensure that we have the capacity in the schools, in the classrooms, and looking at. Although we did an analysis at the beginning of the year, we also have, particularly at the high school, drop add time, where students are selecting different courses within their schedule and working with counselors to do that. So we have to continue to examine to make sure we have enough physical distancing within a class. And it's about 15 students in a class. So a lot of work has to go into making sure that we have enough space within the class to ensure that in a hybrid model, we have that physical distancing in that classroom. And if you just imagine there are 7 periods in a day at the high school, and you have basically 8 periods with the 8th period at the middle school, just ensuring that all of those sections just work out perfectly. In a normal year, we're able to then do that and sort of have students structured and balanced schedules and make sure that the class sizes in those sections meet the class size guidelines. This year, the added complication is we have, and which we're willing to work through, is to give parents choices and options between hybrid and virtual. Now, again, we did plan for that and anticipated it, but with some changes of classes, it still precipitates a need to look at schedules and make sure that we don't have too many students in a particular section to exceed the physical distancing within that classroom. So going from hybrid to virtual tends to be a little bit easier because the students are not having to come in and have a seat, which would be physically distant between another student. So going from hybrid to virtual is easier, and we can make that change a little bit more readily and faster. And we know that there are parents that would say, and we respect this, that if they're not comfortable coming in, we have to honor that request, and they would just continue as normal, connecting into the classroom from home and being virtual. So that's fine. And that's something that can be communicated to the building principals, and we're tracking and keeping record of these requests through Skyward. And then the more challenging part is the conversion from virtual to hybrid, because again, that requires a student to be in a classroom, have to look at the A day versus the B day to make sure that as we're looking at students coming into the building, that all the different classes that they're scheduled in do not exceed the physical distancing requirements within that classroom. And so that is why we did indicate to families that if you were switching from virtual to hybrid, we may need to have time to make that transition. So right now that is at the second marking period, November 10th. Moving forward, we will need to continue to look at those things, and it may take time. That if a parent were to call in and say, now I'm comfortable with my child moving to hybrid, it may not happen overnight because we have to go through a process of ensuring that the classes that child's enrolled in, we're able to accommodate. And so that's going to be, again, a communication with the high school and middle school. And it requires conversation with the administration, and so it may take some time. We're looking at, and we've communicated, we're looking at those natural breaks between marking periods, which really gives us an opportunity to anticipate that shift and that plan. And as we move into the second semester, particularly at the high school, we have different courses that start up in the second semester. So all of those added layers of looking at schedules requires us to have a timeline as well as time to make those shifts, because of again, it is truly based on the physical distancing within the classroom to ensure that we have that set up for all the students.
Thank you, Dr. O'Toole. Some of the parent questions that we've received are motivated, it seems, out of a genuine concern for our teachers and how the secondary program will work logistically. In other words, as teachers balance at the secondary level instruction to meet the needs of both the students who are physically in class with the needs of those who are joining virtually. Dr. Beck, could you speak with us about how we're working to ensure that all students are engaged and that the teacher is able to effectively balance that instruction between home and in person?
Evening. Beginning in the spring and then continuing through the summer, our teaching and learning team, as well as our team of administrators, was really focused on researching and learning as much as possible, specific to student learning within both a hybrid and a virtual learning environment. What the educational research of the past has told us is that students need to be engaged and invested in order to learn. And we know that this is even more important, and the research is telling us this specific to when students are in a virtual and or a hybrid learning environment. And so this summer, we had approximately 40 or 50 teachers at the middle school or the high school who began this work. And we began, as Dr. Goffredo and Dr. O'Toole talked about earlier, when we began this summer in July, we were planning for the implementation of learning in both a hybrid and a virtual environment. And so those teachers really worked to consider how were students going to learn and how would our curriculum be delivered within both of these settings. So with students in the classroom, with students at home. And our teachers have a strong desire and commitment to ensure that students are engaged, both when they're at home and when they're in school. And that student engagement and fostering that was a large part of our work. And so we began that planning in the summer. More recently, the teaching and learning team, in collaboration with our technology department, has worked to ensure that the technology is in place to support teachers in their implementation of the streaming model and our hybrid and virtual model. And then the members of the teaching and learning team have provided training and support to teachers, helping them with such things as thinking through the position of their camera, how they're going to use their laptop, whether they'll use the camera to frame it on them, whether they'll shift the camera or turn the camera so that it can, students within the class can see, or students at home can see other students in the classroom. And we've also worked with them to talk through the audio settings to make sure that all students, both in the classroom and at home, feel connected to that classroom community. Within the class, students may experience multiple instructional models that foster engagement, and some of our 6th and 9th graders have participated in them already over the last 2 days. And one model may be that a teacher may foster a whole class discussion where they're leading a discussion and students in the classroom are participating and students at home are participating, and you can hear them share their responses through our speaker system in the classroom. We've worked with teachers to talk about some of the delay, the slight delay in the technology so that teachers know to give wait time and to allow the students at home to hear the conversation and respond. So we've worked with teachers to provide support in that manner. Students may experience small groups. And so already this week, students in the classroom were paired in small groups with students at home. And so through the use of Teams, students can work in small groups just as they were virtually or just as they might have been prior to the pandemic in the classroom. And teachers have been intentional and purposeful at forming those small groups, or will be forming small groups to support that connection so that students who are in the classroom are meeting with students at home, and the same thing with pairs and partners. And so that teachers may pair a hybrid and a virtual student together and they connect via Teams to have a conversation, or they could pair a virtual student and a virtual student so that they connect together to have that conversation. And as we continue to move forward and the rest of our secondary students start next week, members of the teaching and learning department, as well as the technology department, will be on site in the buildings to support teachers as they implement the models I've just described, or even as they think through about strategies and models that they may want to try that we haven't thought of. And so we'll be there to support them in the classroom with them, or to help them plan and think through what that can look like.
As we've begun to welcome students back this week, I'm wondering if our principals could maybe share some perspective on that question as well. Dr. Capetola, could you talk with us a little bit about what you're seeing at the high school?
Yeah, sure. One of my favorite parts of being a principal is having the kids in the building and getting to visit the classes every day. So in 9th grade, many of our students take algebra, many of our students take biology. I went to 2 history classes of 9th grade students, and exactly what Dr. Beck was talking about was happening in the classroom. And quite frankly, I've been telling our staff, they've been working so hard, and give yourself some grace. And the conversations that I had with the 9th grade teachers today, to my delight, was, wow, this went a lot better than I expected on the first day. So those were the things that I saw. In a history class, there was a discussion of imperialism. There were students at home, there were students in the classroom. Students at home were responding. When the students in the classroom were responding, the teacher would repeat what was shared by the student in the classroom so that everybody could hear. All the students were engaged. I was amazed in one of the biology classes how adept our kids are with their iPads. They have a split screen, they're color coding cells as the teacher is working in the classroom. So there were a lot of really great things going on at the high school today. It was great to see.
Thank you, Dr. Capetola. I think those examples probably more powerful than anything else we could say. So thank you. Let's talk a little bit more about the topic of engagement in the classroom. And one area related to that, Dr. Goffredo, is the subject of cameras, specifically if students are turning cameras on. As we move ahead, could you clarify whether or not students are required to turn their cameras on while they're at home and participating in classes, or if it remains optional for them?
For those that have been on this call, you've heard some of my colleagues reference the importance of engagement and also how hard our staff is working. I mean, our staff our teaching staff has truly been champions of this model and working hard to get connected with children, to form relationships with children. And so the cameras, it's vitally important that our children turn on their cameras and engage. And I want to be completely candid with our families. This is really a concern that I've heard from teachers directly, is that we do have far more students not engaging their cameras. So one, from a teacher's perspective, it's very hard to establish a relationship with a child when you can't see the child, and some aren't even posting pictures. So here's an area where I think families and parents, you can help us to better prepare your students and engage your students in the learning and the targets that we want to hit. So we're certainly not going to be disciplining children who don't turn on the cameras. We want to be sensitive. We understand everyone's personal environment is unique, and we want to be sensitive to what is going on in people's homes. That being said, the feedback from our staff has been students are simply electing not to engage their camera. And so I know it's really hard. Parents are working, families are working. Anything that we can do as a unified group to encourage our students to turn on their cameras, to get engaged, that is really going to fuel our teachers and help them to form even better and stronger relationships with the children, and also so that they can develop those relationships with one another. It's challenging enough in a pure virtual environment, and then it certainly gets exacerbated when children don't turn on the cameras. Even if it's a virtual background or putting up a picture of the individual, of the child putting up a picture, anything to help make a personal connection that you can do to encourage your children to do this would be greatly appreciated. And I also open that back up to our panelists here. If there's any additional, feedback that you have or encouragement for parents, ways that they can better help us to serve their kids, I certainly want to hear from other members of the team. Or if I did a great job answering it, I'm happy to move on too.
Not seeing any, I'm going to move on and say, as a follow-up to that use of cameras and encouraging the use of cameras, what kinds of considerations should we, and quite frankly, our students and parents be making related to privacy?
Right. And as I said, we really want to be sensitive to cameras in people's homes and what children have on camera and what type of environment. We are very sensitive to that. Hence, we're not making it a requirement, as I know some schools really have. Those privacy concerns are very important to us, and they're mutual. One of the reasons, we are not recording lessons on this end. We certainly have an expectation that families and children will not be recording. If you have questions or you need to follow up with a teacher, or you have a concern, certainly do that. Reach out to one of our principals. We just want to be very sensitive of everyone's privacy, and that's the privacy of our children and in their homes, and also even the privacy of our staff and their environment. So we need to work together. If there are concerns, again, my first recommendation, reach out to the teacher, have the discussion, how you can partner with the teacher as a parent to best serve the child. And if you still have concerns at that level, certainly I would say reach out to one of our principals, any one of them, so that we can be partners in this journey and best serve the children. But as much, my parting message on this with cameras, as much as you can encourage your children to engage and turn their cameras on, the better we'll all be, and the better your children will be served.
Thank you, Dr. Goffredo. The last question that was submitted in advance related to our educational program is about the reporting of student progress. Dr. O'Toole, could you talk with us about the tools being used at the secondary level to connect home and school? Specifically, what's the difference between Canvas and Skyward, and where should parents be looking for information about student progress?
Thank you. Yes. So for any reporting of a student's grade, Skyward is the default in the sense that it should be the place where parents go to see their child's grades within the course. So that's the answer to that question, is that Skyward is going to be the primary source. We are having teachers, in essence, also using, as we evaluate students' work, and we are then reporting out on it. When we evaluated students' work, sometimes that evaluation can take on various forms. And that's not only a teacher providing comments on a piece of work, sometimes it can actually be a grade, in essence, where it may not count towards a final grade or count towards a calculation of a grade, but it could give a student a piece of feedback to say, this would have been, you got 9 out of 10 correct, or you got 2 out of 10 correct. That's just information to say, you didn't do as well as you should, or you did really well. And a teacher may or may not decide to count that towards the final grade, because it's information for the student as they're practicing towards getting better at something. So that information, that evaluation, can still be informative for the child as well as for the teacher. And so we sometimes refer to those as formative assessments, in the sense that we're gathering information, we're providing information to the child. And then when we are reporting out on the summation or the summative aspect of a student, that sometimes is referred to as the summative assessments. And then that has a little bit more weight to it and has a reporting aspect to it, or a grade or a percentage or something to that effect. And so on occasion, there are teachers that are using Canvas just as a means to provide feedback and formative feedback. And they have been putting some grades in essence, of assignments that they're doing in Canvas. And we did use Canvas, and I know it's sometimes a little confusing because we did use Canvas last spring. And the reason for using Canvas in the spring as the mechanism to communicate the grading was because we were changing up the 4th marking period way that was calculated. And unfortunately, our system, Skyward, once you start putting grades into the system, it starts calculating that final grade for students. So we were being very mindful and conscientious of how we were putting grades into the spring. This time around, we are asking teachers to communicate the grade of a student through Skyward, and that are counting towards the marking period and subsequently to the final grade. So for a parent to identify how their child is doing, to reference and to identify the students' assignments really that are sort of counting towards that grade, that's going to be in Skyward. So please don't use Canvas as the only means, and primarily because many of the assignments, particularly as we start to transition now students into hybrid and as we continue to work with things, they're not doing all of the work that will be counted towards a grade in Canvas. And so we can't always rely on the mechanism of doing work only in Canvas. We have some teachers that are using, obviously, papers that they're submitting, but also OneNote. We have some teachers using OneNote to have students submit work and provide feedback. That it's not necessarily in Canvas. And so we want to use Skyward as the mechanism, and will continue to be the mechanism in which those reported grades will be displayed for families.
Thank you, Dr. O'Toole. The last set of our questions are really logistical type of questions. So I'm pleased to have our principals with us because I think they can probably best address these. The first is, there were many questions, Dr. Souders, about expectations for students during the day. So for example, do students have access to their lockers? Are they permitted to carry book bags throughout the day? How about water bottles or other personal items? Could you just speak to some of the things that might feel different or look different at the middle school?
Sure. The first I'd just like to start off with is it is great to have kids back in the building. The logistical aspect of preparing for the return is one that has not been done solely by the administrative team. We have worked hand in hand with not only our teachers for their feedback on how to move students through our buildings, but our custodial team has also been wonderful in making sure that the adjustments that we've had to make throughout the building to get kids from point A to point B safely and efficiently has really been a team effort. And I'm so thankful for all the work and effort that's gone into that. When it comes to the logistical aspect of moving our students throughout the building safely, we really did have to take into consideration our locker setup at the middle school. For our families that have students in 7th and 8th grade and have visited the middle school, prior to this year, you're aware that our lockers are actually double stacked. We have high and low lockers. And when you, even with a reduced number of students in the building at any given time, with where we were planning in August, we were just concerned that the communal gatherings, the interactions of the students within that less than 6 foot bubble is something that we really have to take into consideration and brainstorm alternative ways for students to, one, have what they need for each class and still be able to move through the building quickly and efficiently. So with that being said, we took on the sort of the idea of allowing students to bring in their book bags. And through our communications from middle school to parents, we've talked a lot about the need for our students to have mobile workspaces. Those of you who are aware, I've referred to in the last few weeks as like the backpack checklist, the things that need to be in the backpacks. So a student, regardless of grade, when they enter, they have what they need, from their iPads, their chargers, things along those lines. And with the reduced number of students within our hallways and watching our 6th graders, as well as even our first wave of students that joined us last week, having the backpacks is not something that's impeding progress through the hallways. Our students are moving very, very quickly from point A to point B. Dr. Goffredo was in this week and we went up to see the transition, and literally in the 1 minute it took us to get from my office to upstairs, the hallway was clear between 8:38 and 8:39. And that, again, was something that I think is evidence of how the steps we're doing logistically, or have put into place logistically, are really allowing our students to move quickly from one place to the next. With regard to water bottles, again, I have to say thank you for the forethought about adding water bottle fillers and having that partnership with our PTO. And I believe the high school has similar stations in that facility as well, is that our students are able to bring water bottles. It allows them to fill up, it allows them to stay hydrated, and also taking a drink of water during the course of a class also provides like a quick little mini mask break that I know is also often a topic of conversation. So all in all, I think that logistically moving through the building, the steps that we've taken to eliminate lockers, the traffic flow patterns that we put into play, for those, again, who were with us last year and we're up on the 6th grade floor, we have X's that are red and arrows that are green, very similar to the bridges that connect, states from Pennsylvania heading east over to Jersey or even down south into Delaware, to give, again, directional flow. We've added directional stairwells as well into the process. And again, seeing the kids back in the mix in the building, which is awesome today and throughout this week, it really has been effective in moving our students quickly throughout our building. And again, I'm just thankful for all the work that has been put in to make that happen.
Thank you, Dr. Souders. Dr. Capetola, would you like to clarify some of that information for the high school?
Sure. At the high school, parents probably know that we send a Friday letter, and this Friday we also attached our Great Valley High School 2021 school community expectations that were really created collaboratively with our entire staff, custodial staff, food services, teachers, to figure out all those managerial things that Dr. Souders was talking about. So very similar to the middle school, we have the one-way traffic flow at the high school. We had to figure out where students will go in the morning, and listed on that, those expectations were 9th and 10th graders go to the gym, 11th and 12th graders go to the auditorium. All students have the option to go to the cafeteria. Breakfast is free for all students every day, so they have that option also. We had to figure out athletics, our fall sports teams. It's been really great. A lot of them are doing really well. It's great to see the kids out on the fields. We've had a lot of senior nights this week, which has been awesome. But with the kids coming back hybrid, we had to figure out the locker room. So from 7:30 to 7:40 only, the locker room is open for athletes to drop off their stuff, and then coaches will monitor them in the afternoon. So no campus this year. For those of you who have upperclassmen, it's really important that we know where kids are at all times. So students are assigned to study halls, or they are taking an extra elective. But as Dr. Souders shared, we had a great first couple of days at the high school. And parents of freshmen out there, thank you for your kids. The class of 2024 is off to a great start. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Capetola. One of the things that's been communicated is that students are going to be asked to use headphones when they're in class working together. Dr. Souders, can you explain the rationale for this? And are students supposed to bring their own headphones into school, or will they be provided to them once they're there?
So, as you know from listening to Dr. O'Toole earlier, as well as Dr. Beck, there was a lot of time, as well as experimentation done prior to our students arriving. And one of the things that we wanted to see is what would a classroom, look like, feel like when we had a teacher presenting, to students physically there in the classroom while still maintaining that level of engagement and the interactability between the students that are in the classroom as well as those that are attending from home. One thing that we quickly realized is that even as adults, we are not quick to hit the mute button. And what ends up happening, for those who are familiar with Zoom calls or team meetings that are done virtually, where you have people both physically and virtually present, is that with the absence of a mute button, we get a lot of feedback and a lot of looping. And one of the things that we quickly realized is that that can be eliminated through the use of some earbuds, especially earbuds or headphones that have integrated mics. In addition to just reducing the feedback, though, we also found that there was an additional benefit for our students having headphones and using them during the course of instruction. And that was the ability for our students to continue to interact and reduce the distractions that would occur during a typical classroom setting. For example, in a traditional setting, when students would break into small groups, those things would be done quietly. There would be sections, the classroom would be divided maybe in quarters, and groups would move from one place to the next and have those quiet conversations to address the topics that the teacher would like to have discussed. When we're blending both the virtual with now the physical presence, knowing that it's not just going to be our physical students working with physical students or virtual students only working with virtual students, taking advantage of the system within Teams with additional channels and things on those lines that students could go into and have those conversations. The earbuds were even an additional layer of support to maintain that distraction. Well, I shouldn't say distraction free, but to minimize the distractions so those conversations could occur and really allow the classroom to feel, even in a blended model of hybrid virtual, much in the same vein as that of what a traditional classroom would look and feel like when students are interacting with one another. The headphone aspect of things, we realize that there's a lot of preference when it comes to headphones. So I think we're so blessed as a district that, with teaching and learning, working with vendors throughout the area, we have the ability to then provide headphones for every student, I believe, at the secondary level. One of the things that we've run into, though, is that the supply chain has slowed down with the impact of COVID. So even with the best effort and putting a lot of sort of lead time in it, we realized that some of those deliveries were delayed. So in recent communications, we've asked students that if they have their own headphones, especially if they have ones with integrated mics, it could be the earbuds with the wires. We're not sitting here saying one is better than the other. We have students that truly, and even teachers, they have the air traffic controller sets with the cans and the boom in front. Again, it really needs to be a personal preference. We want our children, especially at the middle level, to be comfortable with what equipment they're using. So yes, students can bring in their own headphones, but I also think it's, again, a great thing that our district has purchased. We've had sets arriving at the middle school today, students that did not have them. We had individuals right there on site handing them out. That same thing occurred previously with other students that joined us prior to this week. So the headphones as a whole is something that we are highly encouraging. And again, if they're not something that is currently available or in the possession of a student, rest assured we have those available for every student 6 to 12.
Thank you, Dr. Souders. As promised, I want to give time to address some of the questions that are coming in tonight via our Q&A. We do have 2 final questions that were submitted in advance, so I will ask them and we'll move through them quickly, and then we will progress into the questions asked in the Q&A. The first of the last 2 is that our recent hybrid videos highlighted that when students arrive at school in the morning, they'll be asked to go to designated areas in each building. Dr. Capetola, you already referenced this briefly in a previous response. Those areas are intended for students to sit safely before advocacy or homeroom begin. Could you just each clarify, Dr. Souders first, what the official start time of the day is and when students are allowed to enter the building, if there's some flexibility with lateness policies and things like that?
I think in this time here, flexibility has to be key. Our official start time on a traditional school day is 7:40. That's when they have to truly be in advocacy, seated, ready for the announcements to kick off through GBTV, and then ultimately shortly thereafter move on throughout the course of the day. We also realize, though, that with the hybrid virtual model that we have in play, that parents have elected to transport their students, which again I think is great to reduce the number of students on the buses, and that congestion that I believe everyone should prepare for next week on the campus is definitely going to be something that we're going to have to monitor and take into consideration. With that being said, we are going to ask parents to really try to target, not arriving prior to 7:15. It will keep the traffic down on the campus to allow our teachers to arrive, to get into the building before the masses begin to arrive, either by buses with siblings from the high school, if there's families that have children in both the middle and high, and the high school students are driving. And then it also allows us to allow the parents to get onto the campus in a timely and an efficient manner. For the middle school, when students arrive, I know that Dr. Halfords and I are often out front along with our safety aide to make sure that the cross traffic between buses and parents arriving is done safely. Students will be entering the building through the main set of doors. And when they arrive, we have a number of staff members who have agreed to assist us in the morning to make sure that we have proper supervision in play. A little bit different than the high school. We're gonna operate almost like a parking lot model when you've been down to whether it's Franklin Field, going way back to the vet, anything along those lines, where as students walk in, as Dr. Capetola referenced, breakfast is available. It is free to all students, and we have what we believe is ample seating, not only in our dining room, but out into our main hallways to really ensure that every student has a place to sit and eat in the morning if they so choose. If they're choosing not to have breakfast in the morning, we have stations where students will walk past the dining room and will basically be filling from our choral room, our adaptive gym, into the library, back into the main hallway, through the gym, so that we can, in essence, have a seat for every child to maintain social distancing and kind of, again, almost operate from that parking lot model. When one parking lot's going to fill up, we're going to move students to the next, and again, our staff members that are joining us in the morning will be monitoring that as Dr. Halfords and I are outside addressing the incoming cars and families and buses and things along those lines. So in the end, then we will start to move our students from those holding areas to advocacy in an orderly manner, starting with some of those areas closest to the stairwells, with ultimately staggering the students out. And that will begin right around 7:29. We'll start that flow. Students that are arriving between 7:30 and 7:40 would not go to a holding area. They're going to go right to their advocacy location. And again, through the logistical aspects we put in play, we feel very comfortable based upon the observations we've made this week with our sixth graders that we should be able to do that not only efficiently, but safely, maintaining that social distancing, allowing the kids to get to their advocacy classrooms well before 7:30 or 7:40, that official start time.
Thank you. Dr. Capetola, could you just briefly clarify earliest arrival time at the high school and when school officially starts?
Well, earliest arrival time is when the first buses arrive. So that's probably around 7 o'clock. So as Dr. Souders said, if you're driving, we'd like you to come no earlier than 7:15, because if students come between 7 and 7:29, as Dr. Souders shared at the high school too, they're going to have to go to a place where they can sit socially distant. So the students that arrive 7:29 and after can go directly to their homeroom, because teachers will be in their classrooms at 7:30 and homeroom will begin at 7:40.
Great, thank you. And then the last question related to logistics and calendar, Dr. Goffredo, could you just clarify for parents if there are any calendar adjustments in the next couple of months that might affect the hybrid schedule?
And there will be. When we come up on holiday periods or break periods and we have shortened weeks, we will have to adjust our calendar accordingly. And you'll see some adjustments, and they've been communicated already for the month of November. So first week in November, we have our virtual family conferences with teachers. Those will be held on a Monday and Tuesday. So we need to restructure the remaining 3 days in that week so that we have our asynchronous day for all children, the A day and the B day. So there will be some adjustments there. And then we have just 2 days leading into the Thanksgiving vacation, and we'll have to adjust accordingly. And as we move into our winter vacation, there is a shortened week there as well. We'll be sure to communicate that timely. I know some of the November dates, I believe, were already shared in a communication last week. we'll give reminders. We certainly recognize there's a lot of communication coming at families from all the various departments represented here this evening. So we'll make sure we give other reminders. But please know, when we have those shortened weeks, we will be adjusting when some of the A, B groups come in to meet, as well as when those asynchronous days occur.
Thank you. We have about 20 minutes left in our time together tonight. And as promised, I would like to get to some of the questions that have been submitted through the Q&A. A number of them are around the same kinds of themes or talking points. So I will try to cover most of the topics. The topics that we don't get to, we are recording all of the questions that are submitted, and they will be used to build our online FAQ, which we add to frequently. So thank you for submitting your questions. I'm going to jump right in. The first, we didn't really talk tonight about lunchtime specifically and how lunch will work at the secondary level. We know that students will be seated at desks instead of tables, and my understanding is that seats will be assigned. So our first question is, will seats be reassigned at the beginning of the second marking period, since more students will be returning at that point? With hybrid students in school 2 to 3 weeks earlier, I know many of the students coming in later will be at a disadvantage as far as being able to pick their seat and be near their friends. So Dr. Capetola, could you start to address that for us?
So as the ninth graders have been coming in, we haven't assigned seats this week yet. We do plan to assign seats when we have our full student body back, not on the first Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, but we're going to tell the students that you can choose your seats, and then on Thursday and Friday, we'll record where they are sitting. It's a great question about the other students joining at the end of the first marking period, so we can reassign at that point, because then we will have more kids back in that hybrid model. So we'll probably do the same thing. Welcome back. Now we have the group that's going to be here for the second marking period moving on. You know, see who's in your lunch, and then the second day in, we will assign the seats.
Anything different at the middle school, Dr. Souders?
Actually, I think Dr. Keppel, pretty much wrapped it up there. It was actually very interesting that that question was asked, because some sixth graders asked that exact same question. I know my buddies are coming back in a couple weeks, or these are permanent seats. And similar in nature to what Dr. Capetola shared, one, we are aware of where our students are sitting. Thankfully, we have cameras in our hallways where our seats are, as well as in our dining room. So while assigned seats are definitely something that will be on the horizon for our students, we also realize that this is the only true social time that our kids have during this unique sort of learning environment. So we want to provide the opportunity for students to flex. And we also know, at least for the middle level, this may change for the high school, but once those seats get established in the lunch period for our sixth graders, and hopefully the tables will come back and it'll adjust again. But if we would have the same seating for the next 3 years, it's kind of comical that a sixth grader and where they end up sitting probably in November with that group of friends is the same sort of spot that are going to be sitting in an eighth grade. So I'm looking forward to the tables and those types of things returning to the dining room. But right now we know that we do have to provide that time. We think it's in the students' best interest, and we want to definitely take advantage of that opportunity and that flexibility when all the students who are going to be changing and joining us that week in November, we definitely want to provide that. So
thank you. Another theme in our questions tonight reflects a theme that we've been hearing about globally, and that relates to mental health in this time of COVID specifically. A parent is asking, Dr. Dinsmore, I hope you can address this. Have you thought of having mini therapy groups of students struggling with this virtual learning, peer support, etc., to voice their struggles and support each other? Could you speak a little bit about how we're supporting students' mental health and what supports might be available to our families specifically during this time?
Sure, thank you. I'm glad this question was raised, because it did remind me to plug our partnership that we continue to have with Be a Part of the Conversation. I know that this question is more specifically about providing direct service on an ongoing basis to students, so I will address that secondly. But we do have our first speaker series presentation on Wednesday, October 28th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. It is Coping with COVID, Embracing Isolation. So we have a partnership with Dr. Carolyn Fankel, who was the executive director for Center for Families here in Malvern. She's currently consulting with them. In addition to her addressing topics around solutions to boredom, teen depression, different types of family issues that are being navigated during this time, We are also going to be including a number of Great Valley leaders. One is Dr. Karen Taratusky, who's our coordinator of psychological services, Katie Urich, who's one of our guidance counselors at Charlestown Elementary School, but has done some work in secondary in her previous experience, Christine Izard, who is also one of our school psychologists, currently working on assignment in our special education department. And also, I'm forgetting someone. Who am I forgetting? I don't know who I'm forgetting. I'll remember and I will get back to it. But
Katie
we have
Urich.
a number. Who?
Katie Urich.
Katie, I did say Katie. I feel like there's someone else who I will remember because I will be apologizing to them profusely if I forget. But that's a really great spot for our families to seek support. And I will post the registration link in the chat for all that are participating tonight. It is tiny.cc/GVSD1. So I'll put that in the chat so that you're able to register if that's of interest and you're able to attend. The second piece of the question was about direct service and support for students. So that direct support is certainly orchestrated through our counseling offices. And I know at both our middle school and high school, our counselors have been actively involved with speaking with teacher teams and reviewing data as recent as this week about students who are having a host of different experiences with virtual learning, whether that be isolation, as we had discussed previously, or just being able to access content in classes, having cameras on, things like that. So that is currently a discussion that is occurring. Our mental health professionals and consultants have been gathering students together to have conversations around virtual learning and their experiences, and will continue to do so. But if your child specifically is having concerns around engaging in virtual learning and there are questions, the best venue for that contact would be directly to your child's counselor.
Thank you, Dr. Dinsmore. Related to concerns about children's well-being, we received a question about the use of technology. The parent wants to know if we are considering the use of actual books during this time to reduce the amount of time that children are spending with technology. Dr. Beck, I know that we talked about some of this last night in our elementary town hall. Could you address it at the secondary level for us, please?
Sure. And this is a concern, and this is something that is a topic of conversation among our teachers as well and among our administrative team. It is a little bit more challenging at the secondary level as students are streaming, so that students will be on their devices, or there will be a need for them to be on their devices in order for them, when they're home, to connect to their classes for that whole class instruction or that direct instruction, or to connect with small groups, or to connect with their partners. So there is that need for technology to be, to allow us the ability to connect and bridge the home classroom divide. But we are looking at, and we did send, we had a pickup in the fall. I know that the teams at the middle school and the high school, support staff, building administrators, teachers worked really hard to get materials into students' hands, math textbooks, social studies textbooks, materials so that students could get off that device and do that work. And as we transition into hybrid 2, we are having ongoing conversations with departments and teachers within English language arts, English at the high school, as well as with other departments to provide opportunities, actual books, so that students, when they're in their book clubs, can get a book handed to them in hybrid. They can pick up a book if they're a virtual student. We also have worked really hard to get materials into students' hands. And I know students at the middle school in art and in music or in facts picked up materials, when needed. And we will continue to do that in the sciences as well as the special areas and where that's needed. So we would ask that virtual parents kind of stay on the lookout for those material pickups, as they will be happening probably every 4 to 6 weeks, so that we can get actual books and materials into students' hands to get them off the screens and to do some more hands-on work and more traditional work at home. And we'll be working with teams in the buildings as well, so that students will be closing their device to have those whole class conversations and to do that work, and then engaging with texts and books as well in the classroom. So that will be an ongoing process as we move forward and as teachers get accustomed to that blend of streaming and also connecting with students at home as well at the same time.
Thank you. Our next question is from a parent who says, what is the quarantining expectation of a hybrid student if traveling to a state on the PA watch list? If quarantine is expected, what is the virtual structure for the 14 days? Dr. O'Toole, I'll ask that you take it, and if you could also include some information about whether a student is has access to virtual education if they're homesick. Like, what are the expectations for a student who is ill in maintaining a continuity of education?
Sure, thank you. One of the ways that we looked at this model was to take into consideration the possibility that a student may be quarantined or need to stay at home due to another illness. First and foremost, we want the student to be healthy and safe. And so if they're not healthy enough to participate in class, we also want parents to be mindful that to be aware of the students' medical needs and address those in the sense that if they're not feeling well and really can't participate in conversation, similar if they wouldn't have come to school in the first place, to really make that decision not to have the student participate even virtually, because that may prolong their ability to get well and to come back if they're not necessarily quarantined, but just not feeling well. The other piece is that if a student needs to be quarantined or is at home for an extended period of time, they would just, in essence, switch back to having virtual education from home as they have for the last couple of months here. So it is allowing for that flexibility. It is dynamic in that sense, and we anticipated that and planned for that. So that's why students are enrolled in the same courses and can ebb and flow if needed.
Another related question is, if my child has an illness but unsure of the nature, do we have a procedure for COVID testing before they return to classes? And would their testing for COVID be mandatory?
And I can speak to that one. So currently, we do not have a testing model in place. School districts within Chester County, we have been collaborating with the Chester County Health Department and some test providers to see what we can get in place in the very near future. So currently there's no mechanism in place. There were some antigen tests, which have a quick turnaround, but they have a higher error rate. And we're also looking at some of the PCR tests and looking at options to get quick turnarounds and using some of the grant monies that have come out to some of the county commissioners as well as school districts. So currently there's no mechanism in place. Testing supplies are still somewhat at a premium. And in our conversations with some of the providers, schools have not been extremely high on the priority list. That being said, we see clear value in testing, particularly with certain populations where some of our specialized populations where staff and children are in very close quarters, social distancing of 6 feet isn't always able to be honored. So we'd love to have something in place. We're working with our health department, some other medical providers to see what we can establish here in the near future.
Thank you. We have a question directed to the high school. Dr. Capetola, could you please talk about any plans you have to address the unique needs and desires of our seniors in their final year of high school?
Yes, luckily, and this is something that I learned in the spring, and it was actually a positive thing that came out of COVID. I really worked closely with our student council leaders throughout the spring for the class of 2020, and throughout the summer, and our incoming senior leaders. And now in the fall, we have Tess Lutz and Megan Daney, who are our student council sponsors. And they have done an amazing job working with our senior leaders. And the senior leaders were actually the ones that came up with the idea. And as many of the freshman parents know, facilitated almost 200 tours for our 9th graders on Monday. So yes, this is their senior year, and there are a lot of things that are different about their senior year. So I'm meeting with them on an ongoing process. And I've even talked to Dr. Goffredo about some of the ideas that they've had. Some of them, they're ready to go full force with some things. We kind of have to pull them back a little, but there are definite conversations about, what we can do to make their senior year special in Great Valley. So we're working with the leaders, and we will also work with the entire class of 2021, and we're all committed to do what we can do to make their senior year special.
Thank you for that information. Dr. Goffredo, we received a question specifically related to transportation and our buses. The question is, do kids have assigned seats on the bus? And I guess the next part is, how do you ensure physical distancing on the buses? Could you just clarify some of the procedures around busing for our parents?
And our Chester County Health Department guidance does address busing. Busing is a unique environment. It's unlike the classroom where we can establish desk and ensure 6 feet. We are not able to do that in busing arrangements. And we've tried to be very clear in our communications and presentations throughout the summer. So the guidance does allow for 2 students to a seat. We are asking that family members or children from the same household sit together and be joined. We are limiting to 2 to a seat. In many of our bus runs, we do on a normal years pre-COVID, we would at times have 3 to a seat, particularly with our youngest learners, but we are limiting it to 2 to a seat. The protocol is to fill up the back of the bus to the front as students enter, and we are working to have assigned seats. Right now, we're doing some partial runs. It's just select grades coming in, grade 6, grade 9. As we establish all the children on the buses, we will be assigning seats so that we have that in the event that any contact tracing should need to be conducted by the health department. We can be really cooperative and quickly produce names should that be the case.
Okay. The next question is from a parent. Will the district assess after second marking period and ask parents to choose hybrid or virtual again? So will we be asking parents again for their preference after the second marking period?
I can certainly speak to that one, Mrs. Blake. So the idea of scheduling on choice and based by square footage is really demanding. I can say this as a former secondary principal myself. Having to schedule in normal conditions is really challenging, honoring student choice and trying to make sure we get everything in place. It's a huge puzzle. When you add constraints of limited desks, 6 feet of social distancing, many of our classes are capped out at much smaller numbers. On top of that, we're really trying to be flexible and responsive, not only to the pandemic, but to what parents want for their children. So currently, we're going to make the changes. The next period of change will be November 10th, I believe. And then as we venture in, we're going to anticipate and try to be responsive when those next selections will be. Right now, our mindset is looking to make changes on the quarter when grading quarters end. However, none of us have a crystal ball, and we don't know where cases are going to lead. And if things improve considerably, we may have to reevaluate. And if we're able to bring more children in and possibly even resume a full opening, we'll have to be responsive to that. And conversely, if transmission rates, cases worsen in our county, we may be back to an all virtual environment. So I wish I could give a hard answer on that. I know I'm giving somewhat of a non-answer. We are trying to leave it open so that we can be flexible and nimble. But right now, the mindset is to only allow changes at the quarter, but that may change. And if our strategy changes and our needs change, we'll be quick to communicate that so that families can adjust accordingly.
Thank you, Dr. Goffredo. I am watching the time and want to be respectful of our participants and our panelists. Again, as a reminder, the questions that were submitted that were not answered live tonight will become part of our FAQ sheet on our website. I will also remind you that this meeting was recorded and the video will be posted on our website later this week. We will continue to add content to our website regularly and will continue to communicate with our parents as we move ahead. Dr. Goffredo, any closing remarks?
I just want to thank everybody. I saw at one point we had well over 100 people on the call, so thank you very much. Please, if you have friends or other family members who didn't get a chance to tune in, this will be on our website. Please encourage them. Just that last reminder that we are all in this together. And so please, your continued patience, your understanding, your flexibility as we navigate a medical situation unlike any we've ever seen in our careers. Your patience, understanding are really important to us, and certainly your teamwork and partnership. So I do look forward, as challenging as these situations are, working with our community, working with our families to best serve the children here in Great Valley Schools. So thank you for your involvement, your continued support, and a special thank you to all the panelists. I appreciate you staying on to answer the questions for our family. So thank you to everyone on the panel this evening as well.
Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Have a good evening, and we look forward to seeing you soon in our schools.